Freedom Fighter and Concert Tour are head and head. Freedom Fighter's a tough customer on the inside. Concert Tour set down. These two are dominating. It's 4 back to the Chosen Vaughn and Uncle Boogie. And now Concert Tour is right up alongside Freedom Fighter. Freedom Fighter still not surrendering. They're nose and nose for the wire, and Concert Tour prevails.
Welcome back to Racing Rundown. Today we have a preview of the Grade 2 Rebel Stakes from Oaklawn Park. This has 50 points toward the Kentucky Derby for the winner, 20 for second place, 10 for third place, and 5 for fourth place. So some big Kentucky Derby implications we're liable to get. We're obviously going to get at least one horse with enough points to clinch, usually 40s around the benchmark to clinch. And depending on how horses underneath finish, we could get some horses that are in very good positions for upcoming races. So we're going to go through, as we usually do, preview them. We got 8 horses in here, and I'll give my opinions on every single one of them. And we're going to start off with the number 1, Caddo River, who right now is the morning line favorite, which is something that's very surprising to me. I don't expect him to go off as the favorite, but I can see why he is favored on the morning line, because in his last 2 efforts, he's won by a combined 19 3/4 lengths. The latter of those 2 efforts coming against stakes competition in the Smarty Jones Stakes, with which Caddo River earned 10 points toward the Kentucky Derby, so he's already got some points in the bag for the Kentucky Derby. And if you're looking at this race purely based on who ran the most impressive last race, it's Caddo River, obviously, with that 10 1/4 length victory in the Smarty Jones Stakes. But the thing about that race, which is why I'm against him in this race, is it wasn't against the best of competition. The only horse that came back to do anything on the Kentucky Derby trail that I was that I would consider it at least somewhat impressive was Moonlight Strike, who was 3rd in last weekend's Tampa Bay Derby. Yes, I know Cowan came back to run a nice 2nd in the Saudi Derby. He closed very well, but realistically with Cowan, a mile is about as far as he was going to go, and we already know that Cowan is not going to be on the Kentucky Derby trail any longer. The connections passed up a run in the UAE Derby, and instead they're going to run him in the Al-Quoz Sprint. So aside from that, Caddo River, yeah, he won it very impressively, but he didn't beat too much. 9 5 for me on the morning line is way too much for a horse that is unproven against quality stakes horses, and there's some quality stakes horses in this race. So for that reason, I'm against Caddo River in this race. Number 2 is a very interesting Son of American Pharoah. There's some very interesting American Pharoah horses running this weekend. There's Big Lake, who is the horse we're talking about right now. And there's also a filly out at Santa Anita who's running the Beholder Mile. So if you're an American Pharoah fan, some of his offspring are running this weekend and do look very interesting in their particular races. But that little aside past us, we're going to talk about Big Lake here. This is a horse who's 2 for 4, excuse me. He's coming out of 2 consecutive victories in a maiden allowance company. He did have 2 disappointing races before that, but if you're looking for an angle to try to justify those first 2 efforts, those were sprint distances, and his last 2 efforts, he's gotten out to longer races, a 1 1/16 where he broke his maiden, and then most recently another 1 1/16 race. So 2 races where he was going longer than sprint distances, which is, I think, what you're going to want to see with American Pharoah horses in general. I know that some of his offspring do better running shorter, but I think this is an example of this horse getting out to the longer distances. He closed in his maiden breaking performance. He closed in the race, only won by a neck, but he was coming from mid-pack in the race. So it could be an example of something that he wanted more distance wanted more distance to go in the race. Definitely wasn't coming from really far out of it, but I think that might have been what was able to get him over the finish line, or what was able to make it so that he could win a race. Now, I would argue the same point with his second race. So looking for the positive with this horse, he's coming out of 2 victories. It looks like that may have been the deciding factor in being able to get him to get to the winner's circle. So for that reason, I think he's very interesting in here. The other thing is he's 12 1 right now in the morning line. I think he's going to be the longer of the 2 Asmussen horses, even though I don't like Superstock. We'll get to him once we get through all the other horses. But I think at a price, this could be a horse you could make a strong case to use underneath. The number 3 horse in this race is Hosier, the second longest shot on the board, co-second longest shot on the board. I imagine he'll probably go off higher than Big Lake was. This is a horse who's only won once in 2 career starts. He was beaten on his career debut. He did come back to beat a decent maiden field at Santa Anita. That field did include Fenway, who was very highly touted on his career debut, did not run to the degree that people thought he was going to run. But, I would say that Hosier's probably in this race is the longer of two Baffert shots. There's a reason why he's 12-1 on the morning line, and I'm not super convinced that he's anything in here other than Bob Baffert shipped two horses down to Oaklawn for this race, and I think he's just the second of those two horses. The number 4 horse is Get Her Number, a Grade 1 winner from last fall. This horse won the American Pharoah Stakes in his first career start on dirt, so that was a very interesting thing about him. His first 2 efforts before that came on the grass, so you've only got 1 dirt effort to judge this horse off of. But the real problem with Get Her Number, and if he wasn't coming off of such of a layoff, I would say that you could give him some really strong consideration, because that was a nice effort that he ran in the American Pharoah Stakes. He beat a couple of nice horses. Ron Bauer's come back to run some nice races, as has Spielberg. So if he wasn't coming off the layoff that he is coming off of, then I would say that he would be a horse that I would give stronger consideration to. But just because of that layoff, he hasn't run since September 26th of last year, so very, very long layoff. I'm going to have to take a pass on Get Her Number here. The number 5 horse is the longest shot on the board, Twilight Blue, and this horse is rightfully the longest shot on the board. 2 wins and 6 career starts. He has been pretty consistent since his first career start. In the top 4, 5 of 6, and that one race where he wasn't in the top 4 was in his first career start. So in terms of how he's running in the races he's running in, there's some consistency there. I'm not a huge fan of his. He hasn't run against stakes competition, and this is a really talented group of horses, and I think that he's just going to be overmatched in this race. The number 6 horse is Keep Me in Mind, one of the standouts, I would say, of the 2-year-old division last year. And it's kind of ironic to say that, because this is a horse who only won 1 race last year, but that 1 win was a maiden breaking performance in the Kentucky Jockey Club. But before that, you got to go to the races that he was running before. Behind Essential Quality twice, second in the Breeders' Futurity, and third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. So 2 really good runs behind Maxfield. And we saw 2 weeks ago what Maxfield did. There's no questions anymore that Maxfield is going to continue that progression that he showed at 2 and be a really elite 3-year-old this year. And Keep Me in Mind ran second behind him in the Breeders' Futurity, third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, only beaten a couple of lengths by Essential Quality in the Breeders' Cup, but about 2.5 lengths in the Breeders' Cup and 3.25 in the Breeders' Futurity. So some strong runs for Keep Me in Mind. The one issue with him, I will say before I get to the issue, his win in the Kentucky Jockey Club was a nice win. But the problem with Keep Me in Mind here is if you remember back last month, around this time of year, Arkansas had that really strange winter weather snap, and they had to move the Rebel Stakes twice. Keep Me in Mind was ready to go for the Rebel Stakes back on February 15th, when it was originally supposed to be run. It was postponed a week, then it was postponed 2 weeks. Over the course of that period of time, Keep Me in Mind did not work. So Keep Me in Mind was cranked up and ready to go for a race that was supposed to be run at a time, and then the race was not run. And Keep Me in Mind missed the 2 weeks of work, and now he's had to work back up to get ready for this race. In addition to the fact of he's had to get back in form, he's also had another 2 weeks off that he wasn't supposed to originally have. So for that reason, I have to be against Keep Me in Mind in here, just because I don't really like the fact that he was ready to go for one race and now has had that setback. It's not his fault, but that's just what happens when races get postponed and everything. So I'm personally against him in here, but if he wins this race, I would not be surprised. He has a lot of talent. And the number 7 horse, is Bob Baffert's other shot. Likely, I think, the post-time favorite for this race, Concert Tour. A horse who's 2 for 2. He's following the Nadal progression. 6.5 furlong maiden breaking performance. The reason I make that stipulation is Nadal's was 6.5. And Concert Tours was only 6, but it's the same concept. Sprint debut, and then a win in the San Vicente, and then going on to win the Rebel and Arkansas Derby. Of course, Concert Tour hasn't done either of those things yet, win the Rebel or the Arkansas Derby, but he's following that Nadal progression. And the thing that I would say about Concert Tour is this is a horse who was running a lot shorter than I think he wants to go. Yeah, he won on debut by 3.5 lengths, but You look in the San Vicente, Freedom Fighter, the horse who finished second to him, only beaten a half length, is going to be a decent sprint horse in California. He's going to be a candidate for some of those sprint races that they have, races like the Las Barrera, when they do eventually come around. And he's a solid horse in his own right. And Concert Tour only beat him by a length and a half, but that was because, if you watch that race, Concert Tour obviously wanted more ground. He was pulling away toward the end of the race, only won by a length and a half because it was a 7 furlong race. He's going to get the more distance. I think he's going to relish that extra furlong and a half that he gets in this race. And I tried to beat Concert Tour in here. I looked for different ways to try to beat him, but I can't ultimately say that there's anyone in here that I think has a really good shot to beat him. So I'm gonna pick Concert Tour in here, not to spoil my picks. We do have one more horse, but Concert Tour will be my pick in this race. And the final horse we're going to talk about is Superstock, a horse who, if he wasn't coming off of as big of a layoff as he's coming off of, then I would say that he has a really strong chance in this race. But this is a horse who hasn't run since the 25th of October. I made the same point with Get Her Number, and I'm going to use that same logic. Now, this horse had been running good races. In the Breeders' Futurity, he was third, beaten by Essential Quality and Keep Me in Mind. Stakes-winning horses. We know that there's good talent in that race. Third in the Iroquois behind Sittin' on Go and Midnight Bourbon. Both horses who are stakes winners. Midnight Bourbon has come back to run some nice races down in New Orleans. So we know that he's been losing to good horses. I don't doubt that he is a good racehorse. The problem is he hasn't run since October, and I would be very concerned about. I'm always very concerned about horses coming off of a significant layoff like that. 6-1 is an attractive price, but I think I'm going to take a pass on him. There's other prices in here, and just the fact that I don't like the layoff with him. And I think that, looking for prices in this race, there's other better horses that that don't have as much of a layoff to come off of. So ultimately, my final picks for this race. Concert Tour is going to be my number one pick in this race, like I already mentioned. For second, I'm going to take the chance with Big Lake. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to run this kind of a race in Stakes Company, but I'm going to take the chance with him. I don't love a lot of the other favored horses in here, so I'm going to put Big Lake in for second behind Concert Tour, and then for third, I'm going to have Keep Me in Mind. Like I said, I still do think he's a talented racehorse. It's just I would not use him on top in here because of the situation of coming off the layoff and missing the race, missing the Southwest, and having to wait a month to run in this race. So that is my top three for this race. If you want a four for me, I'll throw in Caddo River in there, but I really don't have a strong opinion on anyone for four. But my top three: Concert Tour, Big Lake, and Keep Me in Mind. Thank you for stopping by for this preview, and we will see you next week when we have more previews for upcoming races next weekend. Have a good one, and good luck if you play this race.
He's in front at the quarter pole. Smiley Sabatka cut the corner smartly. Swill's been switched outside for a try. Keep Me in Mind is finding stride now. Here comes Keep Me in Mind down the center of the track. And Arabian Prince finds a seam and comes on through too. Smiley Sabatka still the one to catch. Keep Me in Mind continues to close. Arabian Prince is up into third. Smiley Sabatka and Keep Me in Mind. Keep Me in Mind up to win it.